And we're back. He went to the lake shore and looked for stones that would make an arrowhead. There were rocks everywhere, and he must have looked at 100, turning them this way and that, tapping them against each other. None of them worked or fit or seemed right, and he stopped and thought again about the arrowhead collection. They weren't just stones in the shape of arrowheads. They had been worked, chiseled, some way from larger stones to get the shape and edge. But what kind of stone and how? Wasn't it some special type of rock, something that would flake off in sharp edges? He had his hatchet on his belt and went back to the shore and started hitting rocks with the flat side of the hatchet. They just shattered and didn't make any kind of sharp point. One rock chipped off a flake about 3 inches long and in the right shape, but when he picked up the flake and tapped it with the back of the hatchet, it fell into a dozen unusable pieces. Flint. There, the word came to him. They weren't just arrowheads, they were flint arrowheads. Maybe they had to be flint to chip right. So all he had to do was find some flint. He went back to the lake shore and looked at the rock supply again, smashing rocks with the back of the hatchet to see if any of them were made of flint. In truth, he didn't really know what to look for, except that he remembered that flint and steel would spark when they hit. He had smashed 4 or 5 rocks looking for sparks when it came to him. There was a rock embedded in the wall of his shelter. He had thrown his hatchet at that porcupine that night he got stuck in the leg, and the hatchet had showered sparks and led him to make fire. It was there, in the fire rock. He had forgotten the rock because there had been matches and lighters in the survival pack he'd retrieved from the plane, and he hadn't had to use the rock again. He went and looked at it for the first time in more than a month, studied it. It was a dark rock. It had depth and seemed to have fracture lines or flaws in it. He struck it with the hatchet and smiled when he saw sparks, remembering the night the porcupine had come. But the rock didn't shatter or flake. He looked at it from a different angle and saw a small ridge, little more than a line, and this time he aimed carefully and struck the line with the blunt corner of the hatchet, using a sharp tap with a little more muscle. This time it cracked, and a flake as wide as 2 fingers and 3 inches long fell to the ground beneath the rock. He picked it up. Ouch! He dropped it. The edge was as sharp as a razor, and it cut his finger slightly. He sucked the blood away and picked the flake up more carefully, and turned it to the light. It had a slightly oval shape, pointed on one end and rounded on the other. Both sides leading down to the point were so sharp they would shave hair off the back of his arm. All it needed to make it a true arrowhead was a pair of notches, one on either side of the rounded end. He put the flake on the flat rock and held it in place with his foot, vicing it down tightly, while he chipped away at the notch positions with the tip of his hunting knife. He started with too big a piece, and it broke with the whole tip of the oval off and left the flake with a flat rear end. From then on, he took tiny chips, each no bigger than the head of a pin, until he had an arrowhead that resembled those in the collection. It was not finished as well as the ancients had finished theirs, but it was sharp and tapered the right way and had a notch for tying it onto the shaft. He took one of the shafts from the war bow arrows and split the grain on the end with a knife. He worked the point back into the split so that the notch was slightly recessed into the wood. He had nothing with which to tie it into position and was casting around for a piece of string, non-existent except for the original bowstring from his first bow, or he would have used it long ago, when he saw the tree with the rabbit skins. Whenever he took a rabbit, he skinned it carefully and stretched the skin on the sides of an oak, holding it with wooden pegs driven into the bark until it was dry. He had not found a use for the skins yet, but he hated to waste anything and thought something might come along. When they dried, they were like thick paper with hair on one side, dry and crinkly and easy to tear. But the last hide he put up during the rain had not dried yet, and he took it off the tree. Still damp, the hide had a strength to it and might make a kind of a cord. He used a knife to cut strips from the rabbit skin and used one of the raw hide strips to tightly wrap and tie to the point onto the split shaft. When he was finished, it seemed to be tight enough, and he had heard that rawhide shrinks when it dries, so that might make it even better. Of course, the hair was still on the skin and stuck out all around and made the arrow look like a pom-pom. But a quick pass over the flames in the fire pit burned all the hair off, and when he was done, he trimmed the ends of the lacing and it looked good, almost professional. He set the shaft aside and went back into the fire rock. He was already thinking of it as the arrow stone and scrutinized it once more. Where he had broken the flake off, it left 2 more edges, lines that looked the same as the first one, and he used the back of the hatchet to strike them the way he hit the first one. 2 more flakes came off, almost identical to the first one, and left 2 more lines. When he tapped those, it happened again and again until he had 9 flake points. He took them back to his work rock and clamped them with his foot and worked tie notches into the shanks with the point of his knife and fitted them to the shafts with the green rabbit hide, and all of this rocked the points in one day. Just as bad things could snowball, Brian found that good things could come fast as well. While he was working with the rabbit skin in the cool evening, he turned it to get a better angle, and the hair brushed his hand and felt warm, and he realized he found a way to stay warm. He had 15 dry skins, and he brought them into the shelter at dark. He had not eaten again, but the hunger was not as bad now because he was excited. Working in the firelight, he trimmed the hides to make them clean-edged and rectangular. He used one hide for lacing, cutting thin strips off the edge with his knife. The first 8 scissors were too small to help, and started lacing the others together to form a large rectangle. It took some time because he had no needle and used the point of the knife to punch a small hole through the sides of the hides and then a sharpened twig to push the lacing through. Also, the laces weren't long, and he could only sew 7 or 8 inches before he had to tie it off and use a new lace, and by the time he had 4 hides sewn together, he could feel exhaustion taking him down. He crawled into his bag and slept hard and didn't awaken until after dawn. Hunger awakened him, and he knew he had to hunt before he worked more on the hides, so he took the light bow and arrows and went to the full bird area. This time, luck wasn't with him, and he missed 3 birds before he got a shot at a rabbit that hit. He cleaned it and used the green hide for lacing and started sewing again while his stew cooked, and before he knew it, he was back in the shelter again. Working in the light from the fire, his stomach full and his fingers flying. But this time, before he fell asleep, he had finished sewing the rabbit skins into a rectangle roughly 2 feet wide by nearly 6 feet long. It would make a good rug, he said, crawling into the bag to sleep at what he thought must be 3 or 4 in the morning. Just before sleep came, he heard the wolves. It sounded like 2 of them. High, keening howls as they sang to each other, and then a crash in the brush as they chased something, maybe a deer. He had not heard from them in almost 2 weeks. There had been a time when the howls would have frightened him, giving him an eerie feeling. But now he just smiled. They must have gotten caught in the weather if it had taken them so long to run a circuit of their range, and he supposed they would mark the edge of their territory on the way through. He would have to go up and remark his own. The rains would have taken the smell away, the first thing in the morning. Good hunting, he thought, at the wolves. Have a good hunt. A good hunt was everything. And scene. So, we saw in that chapter that Brian had a lot of successes, and kind of what it said in the story was that he saw how bad things could snowball, which means that bad things could get bigger and bigger and bigger, just like a snowball gets bigger and bigger when it rolls down a hill. Or, on the other side, good things could snowball. So at first, he was able to find the flint rock to make a sharper arrow. Then he was able to use the rabbit skins he was saving to tie that to his arrows. And then he was able to realize that, hey, I can use these rabbit skins with hair on them to stay warm. So then he was just finding good thing after good thing after good thing happening. So, and you see in the last chapter when a lot of bad things were happening and snowballing. Now in this chapter, a lot of good things were snowballing. So that's kind of what I want to talk about in these questions. So the first thing I want to talk about is basically Brian is learning a lot of stuff in these last 4 chapters, really in the Hatchet as well, and in these chapters in Brian's Winter. He's learning a lot of things. But normally you learn things from people, or you learn things from talking to people. But Brian's out in the forest alone. So how is Brian still learning even though he's by himself? So my first question is, how is Brian still learning how to do all these things in the forest and learning how to survive when he's alone in the forest and he's not learning from anybody? After that, the second question I want to talk about is, why did Brian need a flint rock to make his arrowhead? So Brian had arrowheads in the last chapter, and it was good enough to kill the fool bird and the rabbit. Why did he need arrowheads made out of special flint rock? He was very particular about looking for flint rock. So he said something in the story as to why he wanted flint rock. I want you to see if you remember what he said, and even just think about, why was the flint rock more important than regular rock arrows? And then the last thing I want to talk about is when he talked about the wolves. So he said the wolves were going to remark their territory. What do you think the author, and Brian said he had to remark his territory. What do you think the author meant when he said that the wolves were remarking their territory? And what do you think Brian meant when he said that he had to go remark his territory? So we know that 2 chapters ago, Brian marked his territory off from the wolves, and they stayed out of it, and he stayed out of the wolves' territory. But why did he have to go do it again if he already did it once? So those are my questions. Like I said, you can either write them down and send them in to your teacher. You can type them out, send them to your teacher. Or if you just want to have a discussion with someone at home about them, that's perfectly fine too. As always, remember to vote for your glasses. So option 6, I don't remember the order, so this might be out of order. I think this was option 1, circle glasses. Option 2, gold glasses. Option 3, clear glasses. Option 4, black glasses. And then option 5, Amigos glasses. And then option 6 are the sunglasses. It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be reading the sunglasses, so I don't mind reading the sunglasses if you want to vote for option 6. But as always, thanks for tuning in, and I will, this challenge is special because I'm going to up the ante, and whichever glasses win today, I'll wear those glasses 2 days in a row. So if you want me to see Mr. Jones wearing those glasses for 2 read alouds in a row, make sure you vote. But other than that, have a good day. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you tomorrow. Wakanda forever. Bye.